Ego and Archetype, Part 20. We start chapter 8. Now, this chapter I've really been looking forward to for about a year now, because it's not a chapter we covered in the course, in the introduction to the psychotherapy last year. And it was very interesting because it was at a time where I was getting very interested into metaphysics and the unconscious as well. I read Three Magic Words by U.S. Anderson. There's a good influencer slash teacher that I watch as well, a young kid on YouTube. His name's Neuro Knowledge. He wrote this. It's metaphysics, but there's a lot of psychology in it. So, you know, before I got this deep and competent in Jungian psychology, the metaphysics was really carrying the center, you know, for my projection, for deeper understanding, you know. So it was just a quick little intro of personal background. And I'll talk a bit more about why this chapter is going to be so interesting, you know, on another playlist. Pretty much I've been waiting a long time to get a Jungian perspective and understanding on what is happening in the psyche in terms of metaphysical interpretations, you know. So we finished part 2 of the book. So it's 2/3, I guess. That finished with chapter 7. So we're up to the third, and I'd say the final stage, part 3. Symbols of the goal. Quote, "Man has a soul, and there is a buried treasure in the field." By Jung. Chapter 8. Metaphysics and the unconscious. Another quote by Jung as we start off with every chapter. "Our labours are witnesses for the living mystery." Part 1. Empirical metaphysics. The process of individuation often expresses itself in symbolic images of a metaphysical nature. Such images can be a problem to the empirical psychotherapist, who is reluctant to give credence to grandiose, unprovable ideas about life, especially since such ideas are often associated with obvious inflation, example, in psychosis. Also, the common collective misuse of metaphysical images is a cause for caution. For the psychologist, the word metaphysics tends to connote arbitrary assertions on faith about the nature of ultimate reality. It calls to mind dogmatic attitudes which are repugnant to the empirical temperament. To the scientist, metaphysical dogmatism is a demonstration of the fact that one is most ignorant of what he's most assured. Quote, that was Jung. Jung also avoided the term. For instance, he wrote, "I approach psychological matters from a scientific, and not from a philosophical standpoint. I restrict myself to the observation of phenomena, and I eschew any metaphysical or philosophical considerations." End of quote. In another place, he says, "Psychology as the science of the soul has to confine itself to its subject and guard against overstepping its proper boundaries by metaphysical assertions or other professions of faith. The religious-minded man is free to accept whatever metaphysical explanations he pleases about the origin of these images, the archetypes. The scientist is a scrupulous worker. He cannot take heaven by storm. Should he allow himself to be reduced into such an extravagance, he would be soaring off the branch on which he sits. Should he allow himself to be reduced into such an extravagance, he would be soaring off the branch on which he sits." End of quote. These caveats are certainly in order. However, metaphysics as a subject can be separated from the personal attitude which individuals may take about it. One may take a dogmatic, unempirical attitude toward physics, as well as toward metaphysics. Witness, for instance, the refusal to look into Galileo's telescope because it was known that Jupiter could not have moons. Metaphysics has been Metaphysics has been an honored subject of human concern since the beginning of recorded history. Just as man's efforts to adapt to other aspects of reality began with naive, arbitrary, and concretely mythological viewpoints, so it has been in his relation to metaphysical reality. But this need not discredit the subject itself. Paul Tillich has made an astute observation concerning the relation between Jung's discoveries and metaphysics. He speaks of Jung's anxiety about what he calls metaphysics and continues, quote, "This, it seems to me, does not agree with his actual discoveries, which on many points reach deeply into the dimension of a doctrine of being, that is, an ontology. This fear of metaphysics, which he shares with Freud and other 19th century conquerors of the spirit," sorry, I think it might be conquerors, but it's kind of spelled weird, "is a heritage of this century. In taking the biological and, by necessary implication, the physical realm into the genesis of archetypes, he has actually reached the ontological dimension imprinted upon the biological continuum. And this was unavoidable, given the revelatory power he attributes to the symbols in which the archetypes express themselves. For to be revelatory, one must express what needs revelation, namely the mystery of being." End of quote. Of course, Jung was not afraid of metaphysics. He explored that realm with great courage. He was not afraid of metaphysics, but of metaphysicians. Although figures don't lie, liars can figure. Likewise, although metaphysical reality can be demonstrated to some extent by the methods of psychological empiricism, Those with no understanding of these methods can misuse the findings which are reported. Wow. I'm going to read that again. Likewise, although metaphysical reality can be demonstrated to some extent by the methods of psychological empiricism, those with no understanding of these methods can misuse the findings which are reported. Although Tillich is wrong about the nature of Jung's anxiety, he does not make an important point. He does make an important point, i.e., that the symbolic images of the unconscious, if they are to be revelatory, must express what needs revelation, namely the mystery of being. In Ion, Jung says something similar. He writes, quote, "It is possible to relate so-called metaphysical concepts which have lost their root connection with natural experience to living, universal psychic processes so that they can recover their true and original meaning. In this way, the connection is re-established between the ego and projected contents now formulated as metaphysical ideas." I'll read the quote again. "It is possible to relate so-called metaphysical concepts which have lost their root connection with natural experience to living, universal psychic processes so that they can recover their true and original meaning. In this way, the connection is re-established between the ego and projected contents, now formulated as metaphysical ideas." End of quote. This is a carefully worded psychological statement. It might be added that a projected metaphysical content, when withdrawn from projection, may still retain its metaphysical quality. We know that occasionally dreams do reveal to some extent the mystery of being. Hence, these messages can properly be called metaphysical, i.e., beyond the physical or ordinary conceptions of life. Furthermore, these dreams of individuals, although they use unique imagery and convey an individual revelation to the dreamer, tend also to express a general or common viewpoint, a kind of perennial philosophy of the unconscious, which seems to have a more or less universal validity. The general validity can be best understood as being based on the universality of the urge to individuation. The general validity can be best understood as being based on the universality of the urge. Part 2. A series of metaphysical dreams. Some years ago, I had the opportunity to observe a remarkable series of dreams containing many metaphysical images. The dreamer was a man who was standing close to death. He had death on both sides of him, so to speak. Just before the dream series began, he had made a sudden, impulsive, unpremeditated suicide attempt by swallowing a bottle full of sleeping pills. He was comatose for 36 hours and on the verge of death. 2.5 years later, he did die in his late 50s of a cerebral vascular accident. Over a period of about 2 years, intermittently, this man came to see me once a week and discussed his dreams. Our sessions could hardly be called analysis. The patient lacked the objective and self-critical capacity to assimilate any interpretation that would lead to an awareness of the shadow. What did happen was that we observed the dreams together and tried to discover the ideas they were trying to express. Repeatedly, I had the impression that the unconscious was trying to give the patient lessons in metaphysics, either to help him assimilate the meaning of his very close brush with death, or to prepare him to meet death in the near future. I must emphasize that this man had in no way gone through an individuation process, as we use the term. Nevertheless, many of the images associated with the goal of that process were presented to him in the final dreams of his life. Over a 2-year period, the patient recorded approximately 180 dreams, of which about 1/3 had definite metaphysical or transcendental allusions. Some of the dreams seem to be presented from the standpoint of the ego, in which case there was an atmosphere of doom and tragedy. On awakening from these dreams, the dreamer was left in a mood of profound depression. Other dreams seem to be an expression of a transpersonal standpoint, and these brought with them a sense of peace, joy, and security. As a single example of the first category, I shall quote the following dream, which he had 6 months before his death. I am at home, but it's nowhere I've been before. I go into the pantry to get some food. The shelves are stacked with seasonings and spices, all the same brand, but there is nothing to eat. I feel I am not alone in the house. It is just turning dawn. Or is it the... Sorry. It is just turning dawn. Or is it the brilliant moonlight? I turn on the light, but it comes from another room. Something creaks. I'm not alone. I wonder where my dog is. I need more light. I need more light and more courage. I'm afraid. End of quote. This dream probably expresses the fear of the ego in anticipation of meeting the intruder, death. Light is no longer with the ego, but in the other room. We are reminded of Goethe's last words, more light. There are only a few of this type of dream. Much more frequent are those in the second category, which contain definite transpersonal imagery and which I felt attempted to give him lessons in metaphysics. From this group, I have selected 13 dreams to present and discuss. I give them in chronological order. Dream 1. I am to learn how to do the exercise of a Japanese no play. Or no play. It was my intention that at the end of the exercise my body would arrive in a physical position which would be the equivalent of a Zen koan. The no drama of Japan is a classical, highly formalized art form. The actors wear masks, and in other respects too, there are similarities to ancient Greek drama.
The no play expresses universal or archetypal realities. All emphasis is on the transpersonal. Nancy Wilson Ross describes it as follows: anyone lending himself to the timeless experience of the no never forgets it, though he may be quite incapable of conveying to others an exact sense of its peculiar enchantment. The no explores time and space in ways unfamiliar to our Western aesthetic. The eerie use of the human voice, in which normal breathing has been artfully suppressed, the occasional long-drawn, sad and solitary notes of a flute, the periodic sharp cues and cat-like yowls from the chorus, the abrupt clack of sticks, and the varied tonality of three kinds of drum, the gliding ghostly dances, the sudden summoning stamp on the bare resonant stage where every property has been abstracted to a mere symbol, the extravagant and lavish costumes, the unreal reality of the wooden masks worn by the participants, above all, the artful use of emptiness and silence. These are a few of the traditional elements that help to create the special magic of no. End of quote. The dream says, therefore, that the patient must practice relating to archetypal realities. He must put aside personal consideration and begin to live under the aspect of eternity. The consequence of these exercises will be that his body becomes a Zen koan. A koan is a paradoxical anecdote or a statement used by the Zen master in the hope that it will help the pupil break through to a new level of consciousness, illumination, satori. Suzuki gives the following example. A pupil asks the master, "What is Zen?" He replies, "When your mind is not dwelling in the dualism of good and evil." What is your original face before you were born? Such questions are meant to break through the ego-bound state and give one a glimpse of transpersonal reality. In Jungian terms, the self. One Buddhist scholar, after experiencing Satori, burned his previously treasured commentaries on the Diamond Sutra and exclaimed, "However deep one's knowledge of abstruse philosophy, it is like a piece of hair flying in the vastness of space. However important one's experience in things worldly, it is like a drop of water thrown into an unfathomable abyss." End of quote. I think we can assume that the dream is trying to convey some such attitude as this, urging the dreamer to relinquish his personal and ego-centered attitude in preparation for quitting this world. Dream 2. I was with several companions in a Dali-esque landscape where things seemed either imprisoned or out of control. There were fires all about, coming out of the ground and about to engulf the place. By group effort, we managed to control the fires and restrict them to their proper place. In the same landscape, we found a woman lying on her back on a rock. The front side of her body was flesh, but the back of her head and body was part of the living rock. It was part of the living rock on which she lay. She had a dazzling smile, almost beatific. that seemed to accept her terrible plight. The controlling of the fires seemed to have caused a metamorphosis of some kind. There began a loosening of the rock at her back so that we were finally able to lift her off it. Although she was still partly stone, she did not seem too heavy, and the change was continuing. We knew she would be whole again. End of quote. The patient had a specific association to this dream. The fires reminded him of the fire that was said to accompany Hades when he broke out of the earth to capture Persephone. The dreamer had once visited Eleusis and was shown the spot where Hades was supposed to have emerged. He was also reminded of an unfinished statue of Michelangelo's. I think it's the Awakening Giant. A figure coming out of the rock reminds us of the birth of Mithra from the Petra Genetrix. The dream also has another analogy with the Mithra myth. One of Mithra's first tasks was to tame the wild bull. Similarly, in the dream, controlling the fire was somehow connected with the emergence of the woman from the rock. By limiting the fires, a living woman is being extracted from stone. This corresponds to the disengagement of Sophia from the embrace of Physis, which is accomplished by the quenching of the fires of Desirelseness. In a later dream, the feminine personification of wisdom or logos is again encountered. The image also suggests the separation of the soul from matter or the body, which is associated with death. There is a similar image in the ancient Greek alchemical text of Zosimos. Quote, "Go to the waters of the Nile, and there you will find a stone that has a spirit, pneuma. Take this, divide it, thrust it in your hand, and draw out its heart. For its soul, psyche, is in its heart. For its soul is in its heart." An added note in the text states that this refers to the expulsion of the quicksilver. It is the alchemical idea of extracting the soul or spirit which is imprisoned in matter and would correspond to the psychological process of extracting the meaning from a concrete experience. A stumbling stone, Peter. So I think that's the gospel. In the context of the dreamer's situation, perhaps what was being extracted was the meaning of his earthly life. We must also consider the dreamer's association to Hades, Persephone, and the presumed site of the latter's abduction at Eleusis. This association allows us to consider the dream as a modern individual version of the Eleusinian mysteries. In ancient Greece, initiation into the mysteries was considered most important in determining one's fate in the afterlife. In the Homeric hymn to Demeter, we read, "Happy is he among men upon earth who has seen these mysteries. But he who is uninitiate and who has no part in them never never has a lot of like, sorry, these old texts have weird grammar. Happy is he among men upon earth who has seen the mysteries. But he who is uninitiated and who has no part in them never has lot of like good things once he is dead, down in the darkness and gloom. Plato makes the same point. Those men who established the mysteries were not unenlightened, but in reality had a hidden meaning when they said long ago that whoever goes uninitiated and unsanctified to the other world will lie in the mire. But he who arrives there initiated and purified will dwell with the gods. End of quote. Although little is known about the content of Eleusinian mysteries, they must have included a death and resurrection ritual, since the Demeter Kore myth is concerned with this theme. The descent of Persephone to the underworld and the subsequent arrangement whereby she spends part of the year above ground and part of the in the underworld is a definite reference to the green vegetation spirit which dies and is reborn each year. Thus, the dream alludes to resurrection. The woman becoming disengaged from the rock will correspond to Persephone returning from the underworld. This line of interpretation is verified by a later dream in the series in which the green vegetation numen symbolizing resurrection is specifically portrayed. Just leave it there.